There is a moment in the Dragon Ball universe, a universe that has survived planet explosions, universal tournaments, and literal gods of destruction throwing tantrums, where every single person with a power level, every Saiyan who has pushed through every transformation, every deity who has watched civilizations rise and collapse like sand castles, all of them arrive at the exact same conclusion at the exact same moment, and that conclusion is this. Nothing they have ever trained for, nothing they have ever survived, nothing in the entire accumulated history of their universe's understanding of strength has prepared them for a bald man in a yellow suit who showed up without a power level, without a transformation, without a reason, and who cannot be hurt, cannot be stopped, and cannot be made to care about any of it. This is not a power-scaling debate. This is the story of the day the Dragon Ball universe ran out of answers. What you are about to hear is not a debate and not a tier list. It is the complete, escalating, scene-by-scene story of what happens when the one character who was never supposed to exist in this universe shows up, and the entire Dragon Ball power system collapses trying to process him. Hit like right now. Subscribe if you are new, and do not skip a single part because every part of this story ends in a place the previous part made impossible to predict. The Dragon Ball universe has a specific relationship with power that no other fictional universe quite replicates, and to understand why Saitama's arrival breaks it so completely, you have to first understand what that relationship actually is, and how deeply it runs through every layer of how this world operates. Power in the Dragon Ball universe is not just a combat metric. It is a cosmological organizing principle, the fundamental grammar through which the universe understands itself, ranks its inhabitants, and decides what is possible and what is not. Kai is the currency. Transformations are the grammar. And at the top of the hierarchy, sitting above every mortal and every god and every being that has ever been measured or observed in this universe's long and violent history, there is an understood ceiling, not a fixed number, because the numbers have been abandoned as inadequate several times over the course of the story, but an understood conceptual ceiling, a sense that however high the top is at any given moment, it is still a top, still a location that can be pointed at and said. That is where the limit is right now, and whatever is below it can be ranked in relation to it. This ceiling is the most important thing in the Dragon Ball universe. It is what makes training meaningful. It is what makes transformations dramatic. It is what gives every fight its stakes, because every fight in Dragon Ball is ultimately a negotiation between two power levels, two Kai outputs, two expressions of the same fundamental force, and the outcome is always determined by who has pushed closer to the ceiling and who has more room to go. Even the gods operate within this framework. Beerus is powerful in a specific and measurable way relative to other gods. Wise is powerful in a specific and measurable way relative to Beerus. And the Grand Priest and Zeno exist at the top of the divine hierarchy in a way that is extreme but still directional, still pointing somewhere, still comprehensible within the logic of more and less. The Dragon Ball universe is, at its core, a universe built on the principle that power is comparable, that the question of who is stronger always has an answer, and that answer can be found through combat, through sensing, through the direct experience of Kai against Kai. Saitama does not have Kai. This is the first thing that goes wrong. And it goes wrong before he even does anything, before he even moves, before the Dragon Ball universe has any opportunity to respond to him in any way, because the Dragon Ball universe's entire early warning system, the ability to sense power levels, to feel Kai signatures, to know from a distance that something significant is approaching, is completely silent in his presence. He arrives on Earth, in this version of events, through a mechanism that the story does not need to justify any more than Dragon Ball justifies half the things that appear in it, a dimensional instability, a wish gone slightly sideways, a tournament bracket that reached too far across universes, and he arrives the way he always arrives everywhere, which is by falling out of the sky and landing in a field somewhere that is quiet and green and completely unprepared for him. The landing creates a crater. Not a small one. The physical force of his arrival, not a technique, not an attack, just the passive consequence of his mass moving at speed through an atmosphere, generates a shockwave that levels every tree in a 500-meter radius and sends a pulse through the ground that Krillin, who is training 40 kilometers away, feels through his feet as something between an earthquake and a very bad feeling he cannot explain. Krillin stops training. He reaches out with his Kai sense, the way anyone in the Dragon Ball universe reaches out when they feel something that needs to be categorized, and what comes back is nothing. Not a faint signature, not a suppressed power level, not the specific blankness of someone who has learned to mask their Kai. Just nothing, a complete and total absence of any Kai signature from the direction of what was definitely a significant physical event. This is, in the Dragon Ball universe, essentially impossible. Everything that moves, everything that exists, everything that has biological presence generates Kai in some quantity. Even animals generate Kai. Even insects generate Kai. Even a human who has never trained a day in their life generates a small but detectable Kai signature that a trained warrior can pick up at short range. The only things that do not generate detectable Kai are things that are not alive, which the field crater and the ongoing presence of something standing in it are very clearly contradicting. He reports this to Goku because in the Dragon Ball universe, anything that does not make sense gets reported to Goku, and Goku arrives within minutes via instant transmission, materializing at the edge of the crater with the specific bright-eyed curiosity he brings to everything that might turn out to be interesting, which is most things. He looks at Saitama across the distance of the crater, and Saitama looks back at him. And for a moment they regard each other in the way that two people regard each other, when neither of them is quite sure what category the other belongs to. Goku reaches out with his Kai sense immediately, the way breathing, the way a reflex, the way something so deeply ingrained in his perception of the world that he does it without deciding to do it, and gets the same nothing that Krillin got. And the expression on his face shifts in a way that is very specific, not fear. Goku does not lead with fear, but a sharpening of attention, a recalibration of how seriously he is paying attention to this situation. Because nothing that generates no Kai has ever also been capable of standing in a crater it made with its own arrival. He introduces himself the way he always introduces himself, with his name and a smile and the genuine, unperformed warmth of a man who has never met a stranger. He did not immediately want to befriend or fight, and usually both. Saitama introduces himself in return, gives his name, mentions that he is a hero, mentions that he appears to have landed somewhere unfamiliar, and asks if this is some kind of tournament situation because he has been to a few of those and they tend to start this way. Goku's smile gets wider because yes, actually yes, that is exactly the kind of situation this might be. And the thing that Goku's smile is responding to is not the specific content of what Saitama said, but the texture of how he said it. Without any Kai pressure, without any performance of power, without the specific weight that very strong beings unconsciously put into their presence when they are standing in front of another very strong being. The weight that says, I know what I am, and I am waiting to see if you do. Saitama has none of that. He is just standing there in his suit in his crater, asking a reasonable question. Goku powers up. Not to full, he never goes to full immediately. It is not how he approaches new encounters. It is not how he respects opponents. But to a level that is substantial, that fills the surrounding air with visible Kai pressure, that bends the grass at the crater's edge, and makes the atmosphere shimmer in the specific golden way that Super Saiyan energy makes atmospheres shimmer. And he watches Saitama's face for the response that this level of power always produces in people who are encountering it for the first time, which is some version of awe or alarm, or the instinctive physical recoil of a body recognizing that something enormous is being aimed in its direction. Saitama looks at the golden glow and the atmospheric shimmer and the bent grass and the visible Kai pressure, and his expression does the thing it always does, which is essentially nothing, a slight tilt of the head, a polite acknowledgement that something is happening that is probably meant to be impressive, delivered with the same affect he would bring to watching someone do a card trick he had seen before. Goku blinks. He pushes it higher. Super Saiyan 2, the Kai output doubling, the lightning beginning to arc around his frame, the pressure in the surrounding air becoming something that would flatten an untrained human being and make a trained warrior plant their feet to stay upright. Saitama's cape moves slightly in the Kai wind. That is the complete extent of the effect. Goku stares at him for a moment, and then he laughs, and the laugh is completely genuine and completely delighted, because Goku has been searching his entire life, not consciously, not as a stated goal, but as the deepest and most fundamental drive of his existence, for something that does not move when he pushes, and here is something that did not move when he pushed. And the feeling that produces in him is not frustration and not alarm, but the specific electric joy of a man who has just discovered that the world is larger than his current map of it. He asks if they can spar. Saitama shrugs and says sure. In the Dragon Ball universe, which has survived everything, which has come back from the literal erasure of timelines and the death of gods and the destruction of planets more times than anyone has bothered to count, begins, without knowing it yet, the process of encountering the one thing it was not built to survive, not a stronger enemy, not a higher power level, not another transformation waiting to be unlocked, but the simple, complete, total irrelevance of every framework it has ever used to understand what strong means. The spar begins the way Goku begins everything that matters to him, which is with joy, genuine and uncomplicated joy, the specific emotional state of a man who has spent his entire life treating combat as the highest form of connection available to him, the most honest conversation two beings can have with each other, the language in which he is most fluent and most fully himself. He comes forward at Super Saiyan 2 with a speed that would be invisible to any unaugmented human eye and most augmented ones, covering the distance across the crater in a fraction of a second, and leading with a straight right hand that carries in it the full weight of years of training and transformation, and the specific refined precision of a fighter who has been doing this since childhood and has never once stopped getting better at it. It is not a casual punch. It is not a testing tap. It is a genuine, committed, full-speed strike delivered at a power level that has leveled landscapes and cracked moons and sent opponents skipping across the surface of planets like stones across water. And it travels towards Saitama's face with the absolute certainty of something that has always, without exception, arrived at its destination and produced a consequence. It arrives, it produces no consequence. Goku's fist connects with Saitama's face, and the sensation that comes back through his arm is something he has never felt before in his entire combat career, which is the sensation of hitting something and having nothing happen, not the resistance of something very hard, not the give of something absorbing the impact, not the specific feedback of force meeting force and one of them winning. Just nothing. A complete absence of any of the normal physical conversation that happens when a strike lands. As though his fist has made contact with something that has simply declined to participate in the exchange on any of the terms the exchange was designed around. His hand is not hurt. Saitama is not hurt. The ground beneath Saitama has cratered from the atmospheric pressure of the incoming strike before it even landed, the shockwave alone enough to excavate several meters of earth in every direction, and Saitama is standing at the center of that fresh excavation looking at Goku with polite attention, his head having moved approximately 2 centimeters to the right from the impact, which is the amount it would move if someone had poked him with a finger. Goku lands, resets his stance, and looks at his fist, and then looks at Saitama, and the expression on his face is one that his face does not make very often, not confusion exactly, because confusion implies that he expected to understand and failed, And this is something different from that. Something closer to the experience of reaching for a wall that your entire spatial memory insists is there, and finding open air instead. The brief vertigo of a world that has moved without telling you. He has hit harder things than this. He has hit things that require genuinely more output to move, in the strict physical sense of force required to produce displacement. But every one of those things in the moment of impact gave him something back: a pressure, resistance, the physical acknowledgement of being struck, the conversation of force against force that tells a fighter what they are dealing with and where the ceiling might be. Saitama gave him nothing. Not because Saitama is soft or because the impact was absorbed into something yielding, but because Saitama's body did not register the strike as something worth responding to. The way your body does not brace against a gust of wind that is below the threshold your nervous system considers worth tracking. He pushes to Super Saiyan 3. The transformation is, by any measure, one of the most physically dramatic events that the Dragon Ball universe produces on a regular basis. The hair extending, the eyebrows vanishing, the Kai output tripling in a way that the surrounding environment responds to immediately and completely, the ground cracking outward in concentric rings from Goku's feet, the clouds above them parting from the pressure. The sky itself changing color at the edges from the sheer concentration of energy being released into the atmosphere. It is a transformation that announces itself to every Kai-sensitive being within hundreds of kilometers, a beacon that goes off in the perception of every trained fighter on the planet simultaneously, and says something enormous is happening here. Something that demands attention, something that has moved the needle on the scale of what is present in this world right now. Piccolo, who is meditating somewhere far to the north, opens his eyes. Vegeta, who is training in the gravity chamber at Capsule Corp, stops mid-set and turns toward the window. Beerus, who is sleeping on his planet several universes away in the standard topology but much closer in Kai perception terms, shifts in his sleep and his ears move. Saitama watches the transformation with the expression he uses for things that are visually interesting without being personally relevant, the same expression he might bring to watching a fireworks display from a slight distance, acknowledging the spectacle, present for it, not moved by it in any way that connects to his own internal state. He waits for it to finish, because he is not impolite. And when it is done and Goku is standing in front of him in Super Saiyan 3 with his hair down to his waist and the Kai pressure around him dense enough to physically push the air into new configurations, Saitama gives a small nod that says okay, that was something, and shifts his weight slightly in the way he shifts his weight when he has decided to pay marginally more attention to what is in front of him. Goku moves again, and this time he does not hold back on speed, full Super Saiyan 3 speed, which operates in time increments that make the previous exchange look like slow motion. A combination of strikes coming from multiple angles, in a sequence so fast that the individual impacts blur together into a continuous pressure event rather than distinct hits, each one carrying enough force to rearrange geography, and all of them landing on Saitama in the span of time it takes to draw a breath. The air around them becomes a continuous detonation, the ground beneath them ceasing to exist as a flat surface, and becoming instead a churning excavation of debris and shockwaves, the noise of the exchange registering on seismic equipment as far away as the next continent and bringing Krillin, who has been hovering at a safe distance since this started, to a complete stop in the air because the sensory data he is receiving from the direction of the fight is not data his experience has a category for. When the sequence ends, Goku is standing in a new crater of his own making, breathing slightly harder than when he started, his Super Saiyan 3 form having burned through the energy expenditure of a serious exchange at full output. And Saitama is standing approximately where he was before, with approximately the same posture, and the only visible evidence that anything has happened to him is that his cape is slightly more disturbed than it was, and there is a small scuff on the left shoulder of his suit that was not there before. He reaches up and touches the scuff, looks at it briefly, and makes the expression of a man who has just noticed a small stain on his shirt and is mildly annoyed about the laundry implications. Goku drops out of Super Saiyan 3 because maintaining it is expensive, and the exchange has given him the data he needs, which is data he is not entirely sure what to do with. He stands in base form for a moment, which in his current state of development is still a power level that would have seemed divine to him at the beginning of his story, and he thinks with the specific quality of Goku thinking, which is not analytical in any conventional sense, but is deeply instinctive and surprisingly accurate. The thinking of a body that has been in more fights than it can count, and has developed a kind of combat intuition that operates faster and more reliably than conscious analysis. What his combat intuition is telling him is something that his conscious mind has not yet assembled into words, but that his body has already understood and is already responding to, which is that the person across from him is not strong in any of the ways he knows how to measure strong. He is not suppressing his power level. Goku has felt suppressed power levels before. There is a specific texture to a Kai signature that is being held back, a density underneath the surface, a sense of pressure being contained. Saitama has no Kai signature to suppress. He is not in a transformation that Goku has not seen. He is not using a technique that is producing this effect. He is simply standing there being what he is, and what he is cannot be located on any scale Goku has ever used because it does not interact with those scales, does not push against them or sit below them or exist in relation to them in any way that gives them purchase on it. It is not a higher number. It is a different kind of number entirely, from a different numbering system, and Goku's entire career has been spent learning to count very high in one system and has given him no tools for the other. He asks Saitama, in the honest and direct way Goku asks things, whether Saitama is actually trying right now. Saitama considers this with the slight downward tilt of his head that means he is genuinely processing the question rather than deflecting it. And then he says no, not really, and clarifies that he has not really needed to try against anything in a while, and that he is not sure what trying would look like for him anymore. Which is not said with sadness exactly, but with the specific flatness of someone describing a factual condition about their life that they have made a degree of peace with without being happy about it. He says that the punching was fine. By the way, he could tell it was serious, and he says it in a tone that is genuine and not condescending, a real acknowledgement that what Goku was doing was real and committed, and would have mattered against anything else. Goku is quiet for a moment, and then he asks, in a voice that has gotten slightly quieter than his normal register, whether Saitama would be willing to keep going, because he wants to see where this goes, and his voice carries in it something that the people who know Goku best would recognize immediately as the sound of him arriving at the edge of something he has never stood at the edge of before. The sound of genuine uncertainty in a man who does not experience genuine uncertainty very often and who treats it, when it comes, not as a threat, but as the most exciting information the universe can deliver. Saitama says sure, same as before, with the same complete absence of performance. And Goku closes his eyes, because what comes next requires a kind of internal preparation that even his body, with all its extraordinary conditioning, needs a moment to assemble, and in the darkness behind his eyes, he reaches for the thing that came after Super Saiyan 3, the thing that came after God, the transformations that his story required him to find because the story kept presenting him with ceilings, and his response to every ceiling has always been the same, which is to push through it and find out what is on the other side. And what is on the other side of every ceiling he has found so far has always been another ceiling, higher than the last, more demanding, more extraordinary, until the ceilings became things that gods noticed and angels assessed, and the destroyer of universes stirred in his sleep to track. He opens his eyes and they are teal, and the Kai that rises from him is not golden and not blue, but something that sits in a register beyond color in a meaningful sense. The energy of a Super Saiyan blue pressing against the upper limit of what that form contains and pushing past it into the Ultra Instinct threshold. The form that Wise spent years trying to teach him, and that his body finally learned in the crucible of the tournament of power, because his body learns things through necessity rather than instruction, and the necessity had finally been sufficient. The ground does not just crack, it ceases to be relevant as a surface. Everything within 300 meters of him is simultaneously pushing away and being pulled in, the competing forces of his Kai output creating a localized weather event, lightning coming from the ground rather than the sky, the air itself making a sound that is not quite sound, but is felt in the chest as pressure. He looks at Saitama through the Ultra Instinct haze. Saitama looks back at him, and this time the expression is slightly different from before. Not alarmed, not awed, but the expression he makes when something has managed to reach through the flat line and register as at least in the direction of interesting. A micro-expression so subtle that only someone paying very close attention would catch it. A slight widening of the eyes. A degree or two of engagement that was not present in the previous exchanges. He says, quietly and without any emphasis, that this one feels a little different. And Goku, who has been searching his entire life for an opponent who could make him reach for everything, smiles the smile of a man who has just been told that reaching for everything might not be enough, and charges. Vegeta arrives before the fight between Goku and Saitama has fully resolved itself, which is to say he arrives while the landscape is still rearranging itself from the consequences of Ultra Instinct Goku engaging someone at full commitment, while the ground for 2 kilometers in every direction is still settling into its new configuration of craters within craters, while the atmospheric distortion from the Kai output is still bending light in ways that make the horizon look wrong. And while Goku is standing at the edge of what used to be a field and is now a geographic feature that will require a new name, breathing in a way that communicates effort expended without communicating defeat, because Goku does not communicate defeat, does not have the internal architecture for it, experiences the concept only as a temporary data point on the way to the next attempt. Vegeta lands 30 meters away and does not say anything for a full 3 seconds, which for Vegeta is an extended silence, because Vegeta processes the world through a constant internal commentary that externalizes itself almost immediately. A running assessment of everything in his vicinity ranked by relevance to his own position in the hierarchy of things that matter. And the reason the commentary does not externalize for 3 full seconds is that what he is looking at does not immediately resolve into any category his internal ranking system contains. Goku is intact, this is notable. Goku and Ultra Instinct being intact after a serious exchange is the expected outcome. The outcome that the Dragon Ball universe has come to treat as a given. The baseline from which everything else is measured, Goku at his peak, is not something that comes back damaged from exchanges with things that are not at or above his level. And the threshold for things that are at or above his level is extremely high and very well populated by beings Vegeta has personally cataloged and ranked in the obsessive way he catalogs and ranks everything. But the field is also completely destroyed, which means the exchange was real, which means something generated the force that produced this level of environmental consequence. And Goku is looking across what remains of the field at a short, bald man in a yellow suit who is examining a new scuff on his right glove. With the focused attention of someone doing a quality inspection on a product they are not entirely satisfied with. Vegeta's scouter instinct, the deep, trained, years-ingrained reflex of reaching out to assess a new presence, fires immediately and returns nothing. And this is the data point that finally breaks the 3-second silence, because nothing is the one reading that Vegeta's entire combat philosophy is not built to handle. His combat philosophy, which he has refined over decades of conflict across dozens of worlds, and which represents the accumulated strategic intelligence of one of the most naturally gifted fighters his species has ever produced, is built entirely on the premise that everything has a power level, that power levels are comparable, that the comparison of power levels is the foundation on which every combat decision is made, and that a sufficiently high power level combined with sufficiently refined technique produces an outcome that can be predicted and controlled. No reading means no foundation. No foundation means no strategy. And Vegeta without a strategy is still a supremely dangerous warrior. But Vegeta without a strategy is also, for the first time in longer than he can remember, a warrior who is operating on instinct alone, and his instinct is currently telling him something that his pride is aggressively refusing to ratify. He looks at Goku and asks, with the specific clipped precision of someone who wants a complete answer delivered efficiently, what exactly he is looking at, and what exactly happened to the field, and why Goku is standing there breathing like that instead of having already resolved whatever this is. Goku explains, in the cheerful and slightly too casual tone he uses when he is trying to soften information he knows Vegeta is going to react badly to, that the person in the yellow suit does not have Kai, landed from somewhere else, hit like nothing and took hits like nothing, and that Ultra Instinct did not do what Ultra Instinct normally does. He says this last part carefully, parsing the words in a way that is unusual for Goku, who does not normally parse words carefully, because even Goku's instinct recognizes that what he is about to say next is the kind of information that has to be delivered with some structural care to a man whose entire identity is organized around the hierarchy of strength. He says that he is not sure he can get through to him. The silence that follows this is different from the 3-second silence at Vegeta's arrival. It is shorter and denser, compressed by the weight of what has just been said into something that takes up more space than its duration suggests. Vegeta looks at Goku. He looks at Saitama. He looks at the destroyed field, at the depth of the craters, at the radius of the devastation, and he does the calculation that his mind runs automatically in the presence of combat evidence, reading the environmental damage the way a forensic examiner reads a crime scene, backward engineering the forces involved from the consequences they produced. And the number he arrives at is a number that should not be associated with something standing calmly in a yellow suit examining its glove. He tells Goku to move, and he says it in the tone he uses when he has made a decision, and the decision is not open to discussion or modification or the application of Goku's particular brand of alternative perspective. Goku moves because he knows that tone and because part of him, the part that is always watching the situation from a slight remove and assessing what it needs, knows that what Vegeta is about to do needs to happen for reasons that go beyond whether it will succeed, that Vegeta engaging this is a necessary step in the process of the Dragon Ball universe arriving at an accurate understanding of what it is dealing with, and that Vegeta's understanding, when it comes, will be more strategically useful than Goku's understanding, because Vegeta's understanding always comes packaged with analysis rather than just experience. Vegeta approaches Saitama, and the approach itself is already a communication, already a declaration, carried in the specific quality of how Vegeta moves towards something he intends to fight. Not the loose-limbed, forward-leaning rush of someone chasing a target, but the measured, deliberate, weight-forward advance of a man who has decided that the ground between him and his opponent belongs to him, and he is simply walking to collect it. He stops at 5 meters and looks at Saitama at close range for the first time, and what he is doing in this look is the thing Vegeta does better than almost anyone in the Dragon Ball universe, which is reading a fighter from their physical presence, from their stance and their weight distribution, and the quality of their attention and the 100 small tells that a body broadcasts about its own relationship to combat. And what he reads from Saitama at 5 meters is simultaneously very little and too much. Because the physical tells are all wrong, the stance is too relaxed, The weight distribution is too neutral, the attention quality is too flat, and wrong in a direction that Vegeta's experience tells him belongs to one of two categories of fighter, which are the ones who are completely untrained, and the ones who are so far beyond the need for trained readiness that the readiness is simply always present without having to be performed, and nothing about the destroyed field behind him supports the first category. He transforms directly to Super Saiyan Blue Evolved, skipping the intermediate forms not out of impatience, but out of the cold strategic decision that the intermediate forms have already been implicitly assessed by Goku's exchange and found insufficient, and that his time and Saitama's attention are both better served by opening at a level that represents a genuine question rather than a confirmed answer. The transformation changes the local environment immediately and completely. The pressure, the temperature, the electromagnetic composition of the air, the behavior of every loose object within 100 meters, all of it reorganized by the Kai output of Vegeta at his evolved peak. And Vegeta stands in the center of this reorganization with the absolute composed authority of a man who has worn this power long enough that it fits him perfectly. No longer a thing he achieved, but a thing he simply is. Saitama looks at him, and this time the expression is slightly more engaged than it was for Goku's early transformations, not because the power is more impressive in any way that Saitama's system registers as impressive, but because the quality of attention that Vegeta is bringing to this is different from Goku's quality of attention, and Saitama, despite everything, is a hero who has spent years observing fights and has developed a rudimentary but genuine sense for the difference between someone who is performing seriousness and someone who is actually serious. Vegeta is actually serious, not in the way that produces adrenaline in Saitama, because nothing produces adrenaline in Saitama anymore, but in the way that produces the faint, rarely activated flicker of professional respect that Saitama extends to things that are genuinely what they claim to be. Vegeta attacks with Final Flash as his opening move, which is not his standard opening and represents a strategic choice rather than a habitual one. The decision to open with his most powerful ranged technique rather than close to melee range, because the melee range data from Goku's exchange has already told him that melee range against this target produces the wrong kind of information and the wrong kind of momentum. Final Flash at full evolved blue output is a beam of concentrated Kai that has, in the Dragon Ball universe's history, been used to damage Cell at his perfect form, and has in its modern iteration grown beyond that already extreme baseline by every transformation and refinement Vegeta has achieved since. It crosses the distance between them in a fraction of a second, and it hits Saitama in the chest, and the detonation of it lights up the sky for 200 kilometers in every direction, and the ground for a kilometer around the impact point is instantly converted from solid earth to superheated vapor, and the shockwave reaches Goku, who is watching from what he thought was a safe distance, and physically moves him 3 meters despite him actively bracing against it. When the light clears, Saitama is standing in a new crater, deeper than the previous ones, and he is looking down at his chest where a perfectly circular scorch mark has appeared on his suit, and his expression has done something that neither Goku nor Vegeta has yet managed to produce in it, which is genuine mild surprise, the specific micro-expression of someone who expected nothing to happen and had something small happen instead. Like a door you push that you expected to be locked, giving very slightly under the pressure without opening. He touches the scorch mark. He looks at Vegeta. He says, with the honest brevity that is his only mode of communication, that one was actually kind of warm. Vegeta stares at him. The Final Flash at evolved blue, the technique that he has used as a ceiling tester for decades, the technique whose output he knows precisely and can predict exactly, produced a scorch mark and the word warm. He processes this for a moment, and then he does something that represents, for Vegeta, a more significant departure from his normal combat behavior than anything the exchange has so far required of him, which is that he abandons his prepared strategy entirely and decides in real time to go to the place beyond his prepared strategy, to reach for the form that he found not through training toward it, but through the specific necessity of a battle, where the alternative to finding it was failing someone who needed him not to fail, which is the form that his pride would normally prevent him from acknowledging the emotional origins of, but that his intelligence recognizes as his genuine current ceiling. Super Saiyan Blue evolved pushes past its own threshold through the application of Ultra Ego, and the Kai that emerges from this is a Kai that grows stronger as damage accumulates, that feeds on the experience of being hit rather than being depleted by it, a form philosophically built on the premise that the god of destruction's power is the power of something that has accepted that destruction includes the self, that a being willing to be destroyed in the act of destroying is a being that the normal calculus of combat cannot efficiently model. Vegeta in Ultra Ego is not a safer or more refined version of Vegeta. It is a rawer one, more dangerous, less calculated, the part of him that has always existed underneath the strategy and the pride and the careful architecture of his self-presentation, the part that was there on planet Vegeta before any of it, the part that has always been willing to burn everything including itself for the sake of being the strongest thing in the room. He charges Saitama, and what follows is not an exchange in the technical sense. It is Vegeta hitting Saitama repeatedly with everything Ultra Ego can generate while Saitama stands in place and periodically redirects the force of the blows with the minimum necessary movement, not blocking, not countering, but simply adjusting his position by the precise amount required to prevent the hits from being directly additive, the way water adjusts around a stone. And the environmental consequence of this is catastrophic in the specific way that collateral damage is catastrophic when the being generating force is operating at Ultra Ego levels, and the being receiving it is redirecting rather than absorbing, each redirected force vector going somewhere in the environment instead of into Saitama, and the field and everything around it pays the full cost of this in real time. When Vegeta stops, because Ultra Ego still has physical limits even if those limits are higher than most things in the universe, he is on one knee, and the surrounding landscape has been converted into something that will appear on satellite imagery for the next 100 years. Saitama is still standing, and the scorch mark on his suit has been joined by 2 additional scuff marks, and he is looking at Vegeta with an expression that has changed again, incrementally, in the direction of something that might be recognition, not of Vegeta's power, but of something underneath it, something in the quality of how Vegeta fought that Saitama's long experience of observing genuine effort recognizes as real, as fully committed, as the honest expression of everything a person has. Held back by nothing. He says, and he says it quietly and directly without any performance around it, that Vegeta is the real thing. And Vegeta, kneeling in the ruins of a landscape he destroyed in the process of failing to move the person in front of him, looks up at Saitama, and the expression on his face is something that Vegeta's face almost never produces, which is the expression of a man who has received an honest compliment from a source he cannot dismiss and does not know what to do with it. Because dismissing things is how Vegeta processes compliments, and this one cannot be dismissed, because it came from the only source in the vicinity that has current, accurate information about what the real thing actually means. His pride is not broken. Vegeta's pride does not break. But it has been, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely reached, touched in the specific place where pride and honesty meet. And what fills that place is not shame and not defeat, but something stranger and more uncomfortable and ultimately more useful, which is the beginning of an accurate picture of what he is actually dealing with, assembled not from theory or from someone else's report, but from his own direct, fully committed, nothing held back experience of standing in front of it and being told the truth about it by the only witness whose testimony cannot be questioned. He stands up. He looks at Goku. He says, with the precision of a man filing an accurate report, that they are going to need Beerus. The conversation between Vegeta and Goku that follows the exchange with Saitama is short and unusually honest, stripped of the competitive subtext that normally layers every interaction between them. Because the competitive subtext requires a shared framework within which competition makes sense, and the shared framework has just been comprehensively questioned by a man who is now sitting on a rock at the edge of the destroyed field eating what appears to be a rice ball he produced from somewhere inside his suit. Vegeta says that Beerus needs to be informed and needs to be present, and that this is not a recommendation or a preference, but a logical necessity derived from the fact that the two of them together at their respective ceilings produced scorch marks and scuff marks and the word warm, and that the gap between what they produced and what would be required to produce an actual result against this target is not a gap that additional training or additional transformation will close on any timeline that is relevant to the current situation. Goku listens to this and nods, and the nod is the specific nod he gives when he agrees with something completely, but is also already thinking about the next layer of the question, which in this case is not whether to involve Beerus, but what Beerus's involvement will actually look like, and what it will mean for every subsequent decision in the situation. He uses instant transmission to reach Beerus's planet, which takes him directly to the one location in Universe 7, where the Kai signature is always unmistakable and always enormous, and always carries in it the specific quality of something that is not just powerful but powerful in a way that is qualitatively different from mortal power. The way the smell of rain is qualitatively different from the smell of water. The same base elements arranged by a process that produces something the elements alone do not predict. Beerus is awake, which is itself a data point, because Beerus is almost never awake when Goku arrives unannounced. And the reason he is awake is the reason his ears moved earlier during the exchange in the field. The reason that even from the vast distance between his planet and Earth, his divine senses registered something that his sleeping mind categorized as worth the interruption of sleep, which is a categorization his sleeping mind makes almost never. He is sitting on the edge of his planet's upper tier with Wise standing beside him in the specific arrangement they default to when something has caught their attention, and they are observing rather than acting, and he is looking in the direction of Earth across the spatial distance between them in the way that beings with divine perception look at things that are far away, but close enough to their attention to be effectively present. He does not ask Goku why he is here. He asks, without turning, whether the thing on Earth is as strange as it feels from here, and the question is asked in a tone that is not casual in the way Beerus usually performs casualness, but is genuinely and unusually direct, stripped of the theatrical authority that he normally wraps around every interaction, because what he felt from here required him to abandon the performance and ask the honest question and hear the honest answer. Goku says yes, and describes the exchange in full, including the final flash scorch mark and the ultra ego engagement and the rice ball. And Wise listens to this account with his head tilted at the precise angle that means he is not just hearing it but organizing it, building a structural model of the information as it arrives, cross-referencing it against the data he collected from his own divine perception of the event. Because Wise's perception of the event from this distance was different from what Goku experienced from inside it, and the combination of both perspectives is producing in him a picture that he is not yet ready to share, but that is clearly already substantially formed. Beerus stands up when Goku finishes, and the standing up is the action of a man who has made a decision, not of a man who is still deliberating, and the decision he has made is legible in the specific quality of the attention he is now directing toward the situation, which is the quality of attention Beerus brings to things that he has categorized as genuinely interesting in the specific sense that interests a god of destruction, which is not the interest of someone who wants to understand something, but the interest of someone who wants to establish its exact position in relation to himself, and then make a determination about what that position means for how he should proceed. He tells Wise that they are going to Earth, and Wise says, of course, with the particular warmth of a man who has already prepared for this exact moment, and the three of them, Beerus, Wise, and Goku in trail, move toward Earth at a speed that makes the journey effectively instantaneous from the perspective of anyone waiting. They arrive at the field and Beerus takes in the landscape, with the practiced efficiency of a being who has seen a great deal of destroyed landscapes, and can read their history accurately from the evidence they present, moving his gaze across the concentric crater systems and the atmospheric residue of Kai discharge and the specific pattern of force vectors frozen into the Earth, and he assembles from this evidence a precise and accurate picture of what happened here, how many exchanges there were, what levels of output were involved, what direction the forces traveled, and what the target of all of those forces looks like in terms of the damage they sustained, which is to say, no visible damage at all. He lands at the edge of the outermost crater ring and looks at Saitama, who has finished the rice ball and is now standing and looking back at Beerus with the same neutral attention he has brought to every new arrival this afternoon. And the looking is mutual for a moment. Two beings regarding each other across a destroyed field. And what is happening in that mutual regard is something that neither of them would articulate but that Wise, who understands both beings better than they understand themselves, observes with the quiet attention of someone watching a very specific kind of experiment reach a very specific kind of critical moment. Beerus extends his divine Kai outward in the specific way he extends it when he wants to measure something. A pulse of God of destruction energy that propagates through the surrounding environment and returns to him carrying the Kai signatures of everything it contacted, everything except Saitama, from whose direction it returns carrying nothing, which means that when it touched him it found nothing to return, the way a sonar pulse returns nothing from a surface that is perfectly absorptive. Not because the surface is not there, but because it does not interact with the signal in a way the signal was designed to process. Beerus receives this nothing, and his expression, which has been carefully composed since arrival, changes by a degree that anyone who did not know his face extremely well would miss entirely, but that Wise does not miss. A tightening around the eyes that is not concern and is not confusion, but is the expression of a man who has just received a data point that does not fit the model he has been using, and who is now deciding in real time whether to update the model or to generate more data. He decides to generate more data. He walks towards Saitama, and he does not power up as he walks, which is not restraint but efficiency, Beerus at his baseline, without any activation of his god of destruction power, without Hakai, without any deliberate deployment of his divine Kai, is still a being that exists at a level so far above the mortal ceiling that the mortal ceiling is not a useful reference point for describing him, and he wants to know what Saitama does with that before he decides whether anything more is warranted. He stops 2 meters from Saitama and looks at him at close range, the way Vegeta looked at him at close range, but with a different quality of assessment behind it, because Vegeta was assessing a fighter, and Beerus is assessing something he does not yet have a category for, and is trying to build the category in real time from direct observation. Saitama looks back at him. He notices that this one is different from the others in a way that the others were not different from each other, not stronger in any way he can point to, because his ability to point to strength as a perceivable quantity has been non-functional for years, but different in the quality of presence, the way that very old things have a different quality of presence from very new things regardless of their size or strength. A density of accumulated existence that registers somewhere below conscious perception and produces the specific effect of making the surrounding space feel more organized around them. He notes this observation without doing anything with it, the way he notes most observations, storing it in the flat, unemotional filing system of his experience. Beerus touches Saitama's shoulder. Not a strike, not an attack, but a touch, the specific deliberate physical contact of a being testing the reality of something it is not yet sure how to categorize, establishing direct physical connection as a form of data collection that goes beyond visual and Kai-based assessment. What he feels through the touch is the same thing Goku's fist felt on the first punch, which is nothing where something should be, not hardness, not softness, not the divine resistance that manifests when a being of sufficient power contacts another being of sufficient power and their respective Kai fields interact at the boundary. Just the neutral physical fact of a shoulder, a body. A presence that participates in physical reality, without participating in any of the energetic systems that Beerus uses to interpret physical reality. He applies pressure, not a meaningful fraction of his actual power, but more than the ambient touch, a deliberate, increasing application of force into the shoulder, steady and controlled, and he watches as the amount of force he is applying climbs through levels that would crumble mountains, would crack continental plates, would produce in anything that his divine power has ever previously contacted the specific response of either resistance and countering force or collapse and destruction. And none of those responses appear. And the shoulder does not move, and Saitama continues to look at him with the expression of someone who is waiting patiently for a conversation to arrive at its point. Beerus removes his hand. He turns around and walks back to where Wise is standing, and he does this with a composed deliberateness that is the most controlled response Wise has ever seen Beerus produce to a novel stimulus. And Wise knows immediately that the composure is not ease but effort, that what Beerus is composing against is significant. Because, in the normal operation of Beerus's life, nothing requires this degree of composition. Nothing produces in him the internal state that requires this much active management of external expression. He reaches Wise and stands beside him and is silent for a moment, and then he says, in a voice that is low and carries none of the theatrical authority he wraps around his pronouncements when he wants them to land a certain way, that they have a problem. Wise says yes, with the serene agreement of a man who arrived at this conclusion approximately 12 minutes before Beerus did, but who had the patience to let the process unfold at its own pace. He says that he has been thinking about this since he first perceived the arrival from Beerus's planet, and that the nature of the problem is not one that sits comfortably within the frameworks that the divine hierarchy has for addressing problems, because those frameworks are all built on the premise that everything can be measured, and that measured things can be compared, and that compared things can be ranked, and that ranked things can be addressed in order of priority with tools appropriate to their rank. The being in the yellow suit cannot be measured, and something that cannot be measured cannot be ranked, and something that cannot be ranked cannot be addressed by a system that is entirely organized around ranking. Goku is listening to this from a few meters away, and the expression on his face is one that appears there rarely, which is the expression of someone who has just had a large and important thought that they do not yet have words for, a thought that is too big for its own language, and is pressing against the inside of his mind looking for an exit. He has been in situations before where the answer was to get stronger, and he has found stronger, and he has gotten there through training and transformation, and the specific willingness to push past every ceiling his body presented him with. And that process has always worked because the process always produced a new ceiling to navigate, and navigating ceilings is what his entire life has been in practice. But what Wise is describing is not a higher ceiling. It is the absence of a ceiling in the target, which means the process of finding a ceiling in himself and pushing through. It does not close the gap. It just means he has a higher personal ceiling, while the target continues to have no ceiling at all. And the distance between a very high ceiling and no ceiling is not a distance that can be crossed by raising the ceiling. It is a distance that is definitionally infinite and therefore definitionally uncrossable by any process that works through incremental improvement. He says this out loud slowly, because thinking out loud is how Goku processes complex ideas that are too large for internal monologue, And when he finishes saying it, the silence that follows has a different quality from previous silences in this conversation. The quality of a group of people who have all arrived at the same place and are looking at it from different angles and finding that from every angle it looks the same. Vegeta, who has been standing apart from the group and listening without contributing since he suggested Beerus, says into this silence that knowing it is uncrossable is not the same as knowing what to do about it, and that knowing what to do about it is the only question that currently matters. And he says it in the tone of a man who is refusing to let the enormity of the problem become a reason to stop thinking about the problem, which is the most Vegeta thing he could possibly say, and also, in this moment, the most useful thing anyone has said. Wise looks at Saitama, who is now looking at the sky with the specific upward gaze of someone checking the weather or thinking about something unrelated to the conversation happening 20 meters from him. And Wise says that perhaps the most productive next step is not to think about what to do about him, but to think about what he actually is, because they have been treating this as a power problem since the moment he arrived, and what the evidence suggests is that it is not a power problem at all. Everyone looks at Wise. Wise smiles in the way he smiles when he has said something that he knows will take a moment to land. Beerus asks what it is then, if it is not a power problem, and Wise says that it is a category problem, and that category problems are both harder and easier than power problems. Harder because the tools designed for power problems do not work on them, and easier because once the correct category is identified, the correct response often becomes obvious in a way that the correct response to power problems almost never is. He looks at Saitama again and then back at Beerus, and says that the being over there is not stronger than everything in this universe in the way that stronger means anything in the framework they are using. He is from outside the framework entirely. And the question of what you do with something that is outside the framework is not a question of power. It is a question of whether the framework can expand to include it, or whether the framework and the being are simply going to have to find a way to coexist in the same space without the framework ever being able to accurately describe what it is sharing that space with. The field is quiet. Saitama has stopped looking at the sky and is now looking at a beetle that has appeared on the ground near his foot. Watching it move with the patient attention he brings to small things when large things are not currently requiring him. And there is something about the image of him crouched slightly to watch a beetle in the middle of a field that has been converted into a monument to the failure of the universe's most powerful beings, to make a meaningful impression on him that is both deeply absurd and Wise thinks. In its absurdity, perfectly accurate. This is exactly what he is, a being for whom the scale of everything else has ceased to be the scale, who exists at a remove from every hierarchy and every framework and every system of meaning that the Dragon Ball universe has spent its entire history constructing, not because he destroyed those systems, but simply because he arrived from somewhere they were never built to reach, and his presence here is not a threat and not an invasion but simply a fact. The way weather is a fact, enormous and indifferent and completely unaware of how much it is changing everything just by being present. The decision to bring Saitama to Beerus's planet is not made dramatically or announced with any of the ceremony that decisions of cosmic significance tend to accumulate around themselves in the Dragon Ball universe, where even minor plot developments tend to arrive with appropriate musical accompaniment and a reaction shot from everyone present. It is made practically, in the specific understated way that Wise makes decisions that he has already concluded are necessary, which is by suggesting them in a tone that makes them sound like obvious administrative steps rather than unprecedented departures from the established order of how things work. He simply says that it would be more comfortable to continue this conversation somewhere with more structural integrity, gestures at the landscape of craters and superheated earth that the afternoon has produced, and asks Saitama if he would be willing to accompany them, framing it with the particular warmth that Wise deploys when he wants compliance without coercion, the warmth of someone who is absolutely certain the answer will be yes, and is extending the courtesy of asking anyway. Saitama says sure, for the third or fourth time today, with the same complete absence of ceremony, and the group of them, Beerus, Wise, Goku, Vegeta, and Saitama, arrives at Beerus's planet in the way that groups arrive at Beerus's planet when Wise is managing the transit, which is immediately and without incident, and with everyone's hair and clothing in the same state as when they left, because Wise considers dishevelment from travel to be a failure of professionalism on his part. The planet receives them, and Saitama looks around at it with the mild curiosity he brings to new environments, noting the architecture and the unusual atmospheric quality, and the specific visual signature of a place that has been shaped by the presence of divine power over a very long period of time, the way old places accumulate the character of what has happened in them. And he makes no comment about it, but his looking has a slightly different quality than his looking at the destroyed field. A degree more engagement, the engagement of someone who finds aesthetics interesting even when stakes are not present. Beerus leads them to the area he thinks of as his observation space, the elevated platform from which his divine senses extend most naturally, and from which, on the occasions when he has chosen to observe events on other planets rather than personally intervene, he has watched more history unfold than any mortal historian has documented. He sits down in the way he sits when he is preparing for a long conversation rather than a short assessment, which is with a deliberateness that signals he has allocated time for this and intends to use it fully, and he looks at Saitama and asks him directly, with the blunt curiosity of a being who has never had to develop the social skill of approaching sensitive subjects indirectly, where he came from, and what he is, and whether there are others like him wherever that is. Saitama answers all three questions with characteristic brevity. He is from a place called Earth, though he notes that it seems different from the Earth they apparently also have. He is a hero who got strong from training and then became too strong for the training to mean anything. And regarding others like him, he pauses here. And in the pause there is something that is the closest thing to a complicated emotion that Saitama's face regularly produces. A flatness that is not empty, but is the specific flatness of someone sitting on top of something they are not going to excavate in a conversation with strangers. He says no. There is no one else like him where he comes from, and leaves it at that. Wise receives this answer, and does something with it that Beerus, who is watching Wise the way he always watches Wise when Wise is thinking, recognizes as the thing Wise does when information has completed a picture he was already building, the small settling movement of a person whose internal model has just snapped into final focus. He asks Saitama one follow-up question, which is whether Saitama enjoys fighting, and the way he asks it is careful in a way that Wise's questions are rarely careful, carrying in it a consideration of what the answer might be, and what that answer would mean for every decision that follows, the way a doctor asks a question whose answer will determine the treatment rather than the diagnosis. Saitama thinks about this with genuine seriousness, which is notable because it is a question he has thought about many times and never fully resolved, and he says that he used to enjoy it, that the reason he trained was because he wanted to be a hero and heroes fight things, and he thought fighting things would feel a certain way. And it did feel that way at first, for a while, before the training finished what it started. And then it stopped feeling like anything, and he has been looking for the feeling again ever since without finding it. And no, he does not enjoy fighting, but he has not stopped doing it because stopping would mean stopping being a hero, and being a hero is the only thing he decided to be, and he does not know how to undecide it. He delivers this account in the same flat, unperformed tone he uses for everything, and it lands in the silence of Beerus's observation platform with the specific weight of an honest thing said, without any attempt to manage how it is received. Goku is quiet in a way that is not his normal quiet, which is the quiet of someone listening but processing quickly and already moving toward the next thing, but the quiet of someone who has heard something that has stopped the processing, that has required the whole system to pause and sit with the content rather than immediately begin working on it. What Saitama described, the training, the becoming too strong, the loss of the feeling, the searching for it afterward in every fight that does not deliver it, is not a story that is foreign to anyone in this group, but it is a story that each of them has heard told about themselves in the private language of their own experience and has never heard told out loud by someone else in terms this precise, and the precision of it. The accuracy of its description of something that Goku has felt at the edges of his own experience and has never examined directly, produces in him a stillness that is not comfortable but is necessary, the stillness of finally looking at something you have been keeping in your peripheral vision. Vegeta says nothing and his face says nothing, which in Vegeta is the most expressive possible response, the full engagement of his control systems to keep internal states internal, which only happens when the internal states are significant enough to require that level of management. Beerus, who is not prone to the kind of emotional processing this information is triggering in Goku and Vegeta, redirects the conversation toward the practical, because practical is where Beerus is most functional and most useful, and because the practical question is genuinely urgent underneath the philosophical one. He asks Wise, in the direct shorthand of their centuries-long working relationship, what the actual situation is, not what it feels like or what it means, but what it is, structurally, in terms of how it affects the operation of Universe 7 and his responsibilities within that operation. Wise considers this for a moment and then explains, in the measured cadence of someone translating from a very complex internal model into language that will be useful rather than simply accurate, that the situation is structurally novel in a way that existing protocols do not cover. The existing protocols for powerful beings arriving in or affecting Universe 7 are built on a power scaling framework. Beings are assessed by their relative power, classified according to that assessment, and managed accordingly, with the management tools calibrated to the assessed power level. A being that cannot be assessed by the power scaling framework is a being that the management tools were not designed for, not because the tools are inadequate in any relative sense, but because the tools were designed to address power differentials, and what they are facing is not a power differential but a categorical difference, a being that does not exist on the scale the tools were built to measure. He says that this does not mean the situation is unmanageable, but it means it cannot be managed by any of the approaches they would normally reach for first, and that the search for the correct approach requires them to think about what Saitama actually is rather than how strong he is, because how strong he is has already been established as a question that does not have a useful answer. Beerus asks what he actually is then, with the specific impatience of someone who has been patient for longer than their nature comfortably permits and needs the question to arrive at its destination. Wise says that his current best assessment, which he holds with significant confidence but acknowledges is based on incomplete information, is that Saitama is a being who has exited the natural limiting system that governs all physical development in all universes, and has done so not through divine intervention or cosmic event, or the application of a power that exists outside the natural order, but through the entirely natural and entirely mundane process of training so completely and so persistently that the limiting system simply could not maintain its structural integrity against the accumulated pressure of his effort and collapsed, and that the collapse of the limiting system in a being of organic origin is something that has no precedent in the divine record. Not because it is theoretically impossible, but because the level of sustained commitment required to produce it has never before been achieved, because every being that has ever trained toward that threshold has encountered some version of the normal limits of organic motivation: fear, pain, discouragement, the accumulated weight of setbacks, the gradual erosion of the original drive, and has been stopped by those limits before reaching the point at which the physical limiter itself would be reached. And Saitama apparently did not stop, and did not slow down, and did not encounter any of those limits in a form that was able to halt him, and arrived at the physical limiter with enough momentum to break through it and emerge on the other side as something the natural order does not have a category for. The silence that follows this explanation is long and complete, the silence of a group of people who have just been handed a picture of something that makes everything they thought they knew about their world slightly less settled than it was before. Goku breaks it, in the way Goku breaks silences, which is by going directly to the thing the silence is about rather than approaching it from an angle. He asks Wise if that means Saitama was always going to be this, if the limiter breaking was something that was going to happen regardless, if it was in some sense inevitable given who he was, and how he approached the thing he decided to pursue. Wise says that is a philosophical question about fate and determination that he is not qualified to answer definitively, but that from a structural standpoint, yes, given the specific combination of complete absence of self-limiting behavior, total clarity of purpose, and the particular kind of will that does not recognize the validity of ceilings even when it cannot articulate that non-recognition, the outcome was probably as close to inevitable as organic development ever gets. He says it the way he says things that are important and that he knows will take time to be properly understood, with patience and without emphasis, letting the information carry its own weight. Beerus looks at Saitama, who has during the course of this entire conversation about his fundamental nature been sitting on the edge of the platform looking at the planet's surface below with the relaxed, undramatic attention of someone enjoying a view, and he asks him, with a directness that is the closest thing to vulnerability Beerus's personality permits, whether he wants something, whether there is something he came here looking for, whether the arrival in their universe was directed toward any purpose or was simply what it appears to be, which is a man landing somewhere by accident and responding to what he found there with his default setting, which is showing up and seeing what happens. Saitama turns from the view and looks at Beerus, and the answer he gives is the most honest thing he has said all day, which is a high bar given that everything he has said has been honest. He says that he does not know if he wants something in any specific sense, but that when Goku pushed to Ultra Instinct and the air changed, he felt something that he has not felt in a very long time, something small and faint and probably not what Goku was trying to produce, but real, and that real is more than he usually gets, and that more than he usually gets is enough of a reason to stay for a while and see if it develops into something, not because he has any expectation that it will, but because the alternative is going back to a place where it definitely will not. Beerus takes this in and looks at Wise, and Wise is already looking at him, and the look they exchange is the look of two beings who have worked together long enough to have conversations in expressions rather than words, and what the expression conversation says is that the situation has just changed its shape again, that it has moved from the question of what to do about a being they cannot manage into the question of what it means to share a universe with a being who is looking for something that their universe might be uniquely positioned to almost provide, not fully, not completely, not in the way he is ultimately looking for, but closer than anything else he has found, and closer than anything else is a different kind of problem from the one they thought they had. A problem that is less about threat and more about the specific and complicated responsibility of being the closest thing available to what someone needs without being able to actually give it to them. Goku stands up from where he has been sitting and looks at Saitama with the expression that he wears when he has made a decision that his whole body agrees with, the expression of complete internal alignment, and he says that he wants to try again, not to win and not to prove anything, and not because he thinks the outcome will be different in any way that matters to a power-scaling conversation, but because what Saitama said about feeling something faint and real is something he wants to be the cause of again. And he wants to push it further this time, wants to see if the faint real thing can be made less faint, even by 1 degree, even temporarily, even knowing that it will not be the answer to the larger question. Saitama looks at him for a moment, and something moves in his face that is not hope exactly, because hope requires an expectation of outcome, and Saitama's relationship with expectations has been thoroughly and permanently altered by his own history, but is the thing that exists in the space where hope used to be before experience replaced it. The thing that keeps you showing up even after you have stopped expecting anything from the showing up. The thing that is quieter than hope and more durable and less easy to name. He says okay. And Wise steps back, and Beerus stays where he is but leans forward almost imperceptibly, and the planet's surface below them, which has hosted the deliberations of a god of destruction, and his attendant for longer than most mortal civilizations have existed, prepares to host something it has never hosted before, which is a fight that nobody expects to resolve anything, and that everyone present needs to happen anyway. The fight on Beerus's planet is different from every fight that has come before it in this story, and the difference is not in the power levels involved or the techniques deployed or the environmental consequences produced, though all of those things are present, and all of them are extreme in the ways that extreme things on Beerus's planet tend to be extreme, which is completely and without apology for the surrounding architecture. The difference is in the intention behind it, the specific quality of why it is happening, which is something that the Dragon Ball universe has a great deal of experience with in one form, and almost no experience within the form it is currently taking. The Dragon Ball universe knows fights motivated by survival, by pride, by the protection of people and places and ideas worth protecting, by the competitive drive to be the strongest, by the desperate necessity of a situation that has left no other option, by the joyful pursuit of a worthy opponent, by all of the human and divine motivations that have fueled every exchange in its long and violent history. What it does not know, or has not known until this afternoon on Beerus's planet, is a fight motivated by the specific and fragile hope of feeling something, conducted by two people who have arrived at that hope from completely opposite directions, and who understand, both of them, that the fight itself is not the point, but is the closest available approximation of the point. The way a photograph of a place you love is not the place, but is the best you can do when the place is not accessible. Goku goes to Ultra Instinct from the start this time, not building through transformations, but arriving at the ceiling immediately, because the intermediate forms have already given all the information they have to give, and what this fight needs is not information but presence. The fullest possible version of Goku present against the fullest possible version of whatever Saitama is, not to close a gap, but to honestly represent what the gap is and what it contains. Ultra Instinct Goku moving at full speed toward a target he is fully committed to engaging is one of the most extraordinary physical events that the Dragon Ball universe can produce. The body operating beyond conscious control, every movement optimized by a process that bypasses intention entirely and goes directly from perception to response without the lag of deliberate thought. The fighting style that Wise spent years attempting to teach him, because it represents the theoretical ceiling of what mortal physical combat can become when the mortal removes themselves from it, and lets the body be what the body can be when the mind stops interfering. It is beautiful in the specific way that things are beautiful when they are completely what they are, when every element is functioning at its exact intended capacity with nothing wasted, and nothing held back and nothing performed. It connects with Saitama in the sense that it reaches him, that the strikes land, that the exchange is real and physical, and not a simulation or a demonstration, but an actual committed engagement between two beings who are both fully present in it. And what happens when it connects is what has happened every time today, which is that Saitama receives it and continues to be Saitama, unchanged in any structural sense. But there is something different in how he is receiving it this time that is not visible in any external measurement, and is not detectable by Kai's sense or divine perception, and would not show up on any instrument the Dragon Ball universe could bring to bear on the question. But that Saitama himself is aware of in the only way he is aware of anything that happens inside him, which is faintly and without drama, and with the specific quality of attention he brings to rare things, the quality of someone handling something carefully, because it has not been handled in a long time and the handling of it matters. He is feeling something. Not the full thing, not the version of the feeling he trained for and lost and has been searching for since, but the direction of the thing, the suggestion of it, the way you can smell rain before it arrives and know from the smell that rain is a real thing that is coming even if it is not yet here. Goku's Ultra Instinct is producing in him a response that is not adrenaline and is not the electric aliveness of genuine danger and is not the specific joy of a fight that could go either way, but is a warmth in the system, a faint activation of something that has been cold for so long that he had begun to question whether it was still there. And the warmth is real and small, and not enough but more than he has had in years, and he responds to it by doing something he has not done in any of the previous exchanges today, which is move with genuine purpose rather than simply receive. He steps into the exchange instead of receiving it, and the stepping in is not a counter technique and not a strategic repositioning, but a physical expression of engagement, of the decision to be present in the fight rather than simply enduring it. And the consequence of that stepping in is that, for the first time today, the energy of the exchange is bidirectional in a way that is not about power transfer, but about something more like conversation. Goku's Ultra Instinct reading and responding to Saitama's movements, with the precision of a system designed to do exactly that, and Saitama's movements responding to Goku's responses in the specific feedback loop of two beings who are genuinely present with each other in the same physical moment. And the loop generates something between them that neither of them could have generated alone. Not more power and not more technique, but more reality. More of the specific density of the actual that comes when two things meet honestly. Beerus watches from the platform and does not move and does not intervene, which for Beerus is its own form of statement, because Beerus does not watch fights without intervening when the fights produce consequences he needs to manage. And the fight on his planet's surface is producing consequences that would normally require his management. The ground is being rearranged at a level that will require significant effort to restore. The atmospheric conditions have changed in ways that will take time to normalize. The structural integrity of the planet's outer layers is being tested in a way that his planet has not been tested since the last time he himself was fighting at full capacity on its surface. He watches all of this and does not move, because what he is watching is not a threat and is not a problem, and is not something that his management would improve. And the recognition of this represents something that has shifted in Beerus since the conversation on the platform. A shift in how he is understanding what this situation is, and what his role in it appropriately looks like. Wise stands beside him and watches with the expression he maintains when he is observing something that he finds genuinely interesting rather than administratively significant, which is rare enough that the expression is distinctive, a quality of attention that is warmer and less structured than his working attention, the attention of someone who has set down the role for a moment and is simply present as a being who finds this worth watching. He has understood the situation more completely and more quickly than anyone else present, which is his nature and his function. But the understanding he has arrived at is one that he holds with something like humility, because it points toward questions that his understanding cannot fully answer, which is unusual for Wise, and which he experiences with the particular interest of someone who has spent a very long time being the most informed person in every room, and who finds the experience of not being the most informed person both uncomfortable and genuinely stimulating. The fight eventually arrives at the point where Goku's Ultra Instinct has given everything it has to give, where the form has been sustained at maximum output for long enough that even the body operating beyond conscious limitation begins to reach the edges of what it can sustain, and he comes down from it and stands in the landscape that the exchange has produced, breathing with the specific quality of effort fully spent. And he looks at Saitama, and what he sees in Saitama's face is different from what he saw at the start of the day, different from the neutral blankness of the field and the polite attention of the early exchanges, and even the slightly more engaged expression of the later ones. What he sees is the aftermath of the faint warmth, the specific quality of a face that has recently contained a feeling it had forgotten, the face not of someone who has been given what they needed, but of someone who has been reminded that what they need is real and exists somewhere, and is worth continuing to look for. Goku sits down on what remains of the ground and looks at the sky and says, without preamble, and without the social structuring, he normally wraps around things he wants to sound casual, that he does not know how to give Saitama what Saitama is looking for, but that he wants to keep trying, not because he thinks he will eventually succeed, but because the trying itself produces something in him that he recognizes as important. The specific engagement of a fight that asks him for everything, and does not let him know in advance whether everything will be enough. The feeling that his entire combat career has been organized around finding, and that has gotten harder to find as his power has grown and the population of things that can produce it has shrunk. He says that fighting Saitama is the closest he has come in a long time to not knowing, and not knowing is the thing he has always needed underneath everything else. Saitama sits down on the ground near him, not beside him exactly but near him, the spatial arrangement of two people who are not yet friends but have arrived at something that is in the direction of friendship. And he says that the purple thing earlier was the closest he has come in a long time to feeling it, the thing he lost, and that close is not the same as having it, but close is something, and something is more than he came here with. And he says this with the flat honesty that is his only register, and that by this point in the day has stopped reading as blankness, and has started reading as precision, the precision of a man who has stripped away every layer of social performance and emotional management, and is simply reporting accurately on the contents of his experience. What the Dragon Ball world becomes after Saitama is not a simpler place or a more resolved one, not a place where the questions that his arrival raised have been answered or the frameworks his presence stressed have been repaired. It becomes a larger place, in the specific sense that places become larger when they discover that their edges are not where they thought they were, that the map they have been using has blank space at the margins where they assumed there was nothing because nothing they had encountered had required them to draw that far. Goku trains differently after this, not toward a specific goal of matching Saitama, because the goal of matching Saitama is not a goal that the Dragon Ball universe's development system can support. It is not a higher transformation waiting to be unlocked, not a ceiling waiting to be broken through, not a power level waiting to be reached, because Saitama's strength is not located on the axis that Goku trains along, and training along that axis will not eventually intersect with it. He trains differently in the sense that he now knows the difference between training toward a ceiling and training, because the training itself is the point. Because the process of pushing towards something that will not be reached is still a process that makes him more than he was, and more than he was is the only direction he knows how to move in, and moving in it is enough even when the destination is not accessible. Vegeta takes longer to arrive at this and arrives at it differently, through a private reckoning that he conducts alone and does not share with anyone, but that produces in him a change in the quality of his training that his family notices before he acknowledges it, a seriousness that is somehow less burdened than his previous seriousness, as though some weight that he was carrying inside the training has been set down. The weight of performing the training for the purpose of the outcome rather than for the purpose of the training itself, and without that weight the training becomes something it has not been for him in a long time, which is honest. Beerus does not train and does not change his habits, and does not have the internal reckoning that Goku and Vegeta have, because Beerus's relationship with his own power is not organized around the pursuit of more in the way that Saiyan psychology organizes it. But he does change something, which is the quality of his attention toward the universe he is responsible for, the degree to which he is genuinely paying attention to what is in it rather than managing it from a comfortable distance. And this change is small and will not produce dramatic consequences for a long time, but is real and will eventually matter in ways that no one present today will fully predict. Wise notices it and says nothing, because Wise says nothing about the things that people are in the process of becoming, only about the things they have finished becoming, and Beerus is very much still in the process. Saitama stays for a while. Not permanently and not with any declared intention of permanence, but in the specific way of someone who has found that a place offers something and has not yet found the edge of what it offers, and is not in any hurry to leave before finding that edge. He fights Goku again, several times, and each time the exchange produces something slightly different from the last, not escalating in the power sense but deepening in the other sense. The sense of two people learning the specific language of each other through the only medium they fully share, and in each exchange Saitama finds the faint warmth in a slightly different location, approaches it from a slightly different angle, holds it for a slightly longer duration before it fades back into the flat line. It is not the answer. It was never going to be the answer. The Dragon Ball universe cannot give Saitama what he lost because what he lost was the product of a specific condition that no longer exists in him and cannot be recreated. The condition of being a being with limits who does not yet know his limits. The condition of genuine uncertainty about whether he is enough. The condition that makes every fight a real question with a real answer, rather than a foregone conclusion delivered at a speed that the universe cannot track. That condition is gone, and it is gone permanently, and no amount of powerful opponents or extraordinary techniques or divine interventions will bring it back, because the loss of it was not a wound that can be healed but a change that cannot be unchanged, the specific irreversibility of becoming something you cannot become, not. But the Dragon Ball world gives him something adjacent to it, something that is not the thing but is in the neighborhood of the thing, the neighborhood being in this case the specific experience of a universe that tries, that reaches, that brings everything it has to every exchange, that does not stop looking for more even when more is not available, and that quality, the quality of trying without guarantee, of reaching without certainty of arrival, of pushing against a ceiling you know you will not break but pushing anyway because the pushing is what you are, is something that Saitama recognizes and responds to with the only part of himself that has not been flattened by the training, which is the part that chose to be a hero before the training was complete, before the limiter broke, before the feeling went away, the part that decided what it was when it still had the ability to feel the weight of the decision, and that decision, made by a version of himself that no longer exists in any other sense, is still the foundation of everything, still the thing he stands on when everything else has been taken away by his own extraordinary and terrible completeness. He watches Goku train one morning, sitting on the edge of Beerus's planet's upper tier where Beerus and Wise sat at the beginning of all this, and there is something in watching Goku train that Saitama finds genuinely affecting, not emotionally in the performed sense, but in the quiet sense of something real moving in a place that is mostly still. The specific beauty of watching someone pursue something they have not reached yet with the full commitment of someone who believes the reaching is possible. And the beauty of it is not diminished by Saitama's knowledge that the thing Goku is reaching for is not the thing he thinks it is, that the training will produce something but not the something Goku currently has in mind, because that is true of most sincere reaching, and the sincerity does not become less sincere for being aimed at the wrong target. He thinks, watching Goku, that this is what he trained for. Not this specific scene, not this specific planet, not these specific people, but this, the quality of it, the being in the presence of genuine trying, the not being alone in a world that has nothing left to offer. He trained to be a hero because heroes are the people who show up, and showing up is the whole job, and he is here and Goku is there. And the morning is doing what mornings do on Beerus's planet, which is arriving with more color than most mornings because divine atmospheres are not subtle about transitions, and none of it is the answer and all of it is something, and something, right now, is enough. The Dragon Ball world does not return to normal after Saitama. Normal was never the right word for it anyway. It was always a world in the process of becoming something, always pushing past its previous ceiling in the specific way that worlds organized around the pursuit of strength push past their ceilings, always finding that the next thing is larger than the current thing, and responding to that discovery with the only response it has ever known, which is to grow toward it. What Saitama adds to that process is not a direction or a destination, but a quality. The quality of having been in the presence of something that cannot be measured and discovering that cannot be measured is not the same as does not matter, that the things outside the framework are still real, still present, still part of the world even when the world's frameworks cannot accurately describe them, and that a world capable of holding that knowledge is a larger world than one that cannot, and larger. In a universe organized around the pursuit of more, is never the wrong direction to grow.